Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, Science Fellow and Principal Atmospheric Scientist for Nutrient Ag Solutions, and I want to thank you for watching this summer forecast here brought to you by Farm Credit Illinois. We're going to begin first with a look at what spring's delivered so far. And so our first map is the latest drought monitor, which was released here at the end of May, and it still shows a significant portion of the United States that is in drought. Most of that drought is focused in the west, but something to take note of. Just look right here in through this corridor into parts of the Great Lakes states in the Midwest and then extending into the northern plains. Despite some recent precipitation in this area, we have continued to see drought conditions stay in this area. Drought has developed over here in parts of the mid-Atlantic as well, and that's critical to think about when we think about the whole picture, primarily of corn and soybeans here, because we do grow quite a bit of that over here in North and South Carolina. But the most extensive drought is to the west, and it is going to be firmly in place there for a while. And the western United States had one of its driest springs on record. Now, let's look at the latest drought monitor class change map. This will tell us how things have evolved over the last 2 months. So when you look at this map, these colors down here represent improvement in the drought situation, like we've seen in the southern plains and high plains extending into Wyoming, and where we've seen degradation in drought, like in the mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas, parts of lower Michigan extending here near Chicago and southern Wisconsin, very dry through this area, and also into pockets of Iowa. The places that have been dry continue to get drier, like the northern plains and along the west coast. Zooming in and looking at some statistics here, this would be the April 1st through June 2nd total precipitation rank by climate district. Now what we're doing here is we have 129 years worth of data, and over that time period we're going to rank every year and tell you where this year sits. So as you look across the state of Illinois, this pocket in through here from Peoria back to almost like Springfield, Bloomington, and then down towards St. Louis over toward the west has been wetter. Our driest regions have been farther to the north. We have had some precip lately that hit southern Illinois over into southern Indiana, but it's this corridor right in through here that has had some very early spring dryness. Now, if I get rid of April and just show you May to June 2nd, this is what you get. Better rains have come in the month of May, although they came on some pretty chilly air. I remember Mother's Day weekend, that was terrible for us here in the state of Illinois. Let's look at it one more way here. Last 30 days, and now the map shows you percent of normal. You kind of see a few things here. North of I-80 and then south of I-70, that's where we had our drier pockets. But here at the beginning of June, better rains did move through this area, but we're going to continue to watch the northern part of the state for continued dryness. Okay, thinking about that, let's now see what the soil has taken in. This 30 to 70% range, we would just consider that the normal range. And notice how through much of the state of Illinois, we're looking pretty good. Over in the east, and then really up here, right along the border with Wisconsin, that's where we have our largest deficits. But just step back and look at the bigger picture. Much of the eastern Corn Belt over through the mid-Atlantic is right now dealing with very, very dry conditions and the subsoil moisture. How far down are we talking about? 40 centimeters. That's about 16 inches. You can see then Iowa, Minnesota, and up through the Dakotas, that's an area that's very dry as well. It has been down here in the southern plains to the high plains where we've beaten back the drought and we've saturated the soil in this area, which is going to make it very vulnerable to tropical cyclones now that we've entered the hurricane season. Something else to think about there. From here, let's talk temperatures. The month of May was a cool one. We had multiple shots at pretty chilly air. Overall, when we boil it all down, we were about 3 degrees cooler than normal on average for the state of Illinois. So where does that put us on the rank? Well, we're about 95, let's just call it 95 to 100 on average. And that would be, 129 would be the coolest. So we were cool. And as a result of that, this crop really has not jumped out of the ground. It also doesn't help that at times we saw a lot of cloud cover. That's what you get from this map. It shows cumulative downward solar flux. What it means is where the colors are cool, that was a lot more cloud cover than clear skies. And as you get over here to the western side of the state and southern part of the state, you do see increased cloud cover, therefore kind of robbing the crop of some early season sunshine. From there, I want to check in on growing degree day units. Now, I started the calculation on May the 1st, and it goes through the very end of May. And you notice that throughout much of the state, we're almost right on target for our normal rate of accumulation of GDUs. But some cooler shots in May have really kind of stunted the early growth of this crop. From there, let's give you the actual number since the beginning of May, and we've run right across the middle of the state. We're looking at about 410 GDUs accumulated so far in the month of May. Now, all of this is about to change in a big way. Let's get into the forecast. Next 5 days, some of the extreme heat that's been in the western United States, where they've been deep into the triple digits, is now spreading here through the plains, northern plains, Canadian Prairie, and the Great Lakes over the next 5 days. So just thinking about getting us from now to about June 7th, 8th, 9th, we're going to see these temperatures really start to rebound here across the state of Illinois. And then going toward the middle of the month, then it's going to be quite warm. Now, this gets you all the way out here to day 10, so this would be about the 12th to the 13th, and during that time period, we're going to see very, very warm temperatures extending throughout the majority of the Corn Belt. So some early season lack of heat, well, the sun's going to be beaten down here, and we're going to be seeing quite a bit of warm and very humid weather getting into this crop here as we move our way through the middle part of June. But the question is, it can be humid and still not rain, and I'm going to talk about that. Because over the next 10 days, again, this gets us out to the 12th of June, we do notice very wet in Texas. This is a system going through in early June right here through the Ohio River Valley. But then after that, much of the Corn Belt's going to spend, the first full week of June on the drier side of things, especially through Illinois. So as our temperatures build, we're not going to be adding much precipitation. That's why it's good that we've got enough subsoil moisture to kind of carry the crop through this time period as the heat builds up. But the northern plains, they're going to be dry too. Where's that rain going? Way up here into the Canadian Prairie. And there is a chance, getting way out into next week, that we could get some precip that does try to come through the Midwest. But I'll say this, the Gulf of Mexico and its transport of moisture, it's going to be wide open. So if we just start here on June the 2nd and just play forward, these color shadings you see here, well, the higher up you go in the color bar, the more humid, the more moisture there is in the atmosphere. And so even though we see the drier forecast in terms of precipitation getting to the ground, storms are going to pop with this kind of humidity. It's going to be hit or miss, though, and that's always our problem, right? Some folks get the rain and others do not. Now, as we work our way into the longer range, we have some big questions to ask and answer. And the biggest one is, what are our concerns for this temperature pattern and the precipitation pattern and the risk of drought? And to do that, we got to study the flow of the atmosphere together. So what I'm going to do next is I want to show you the trough and ridge pattern, at least out through the middle of the month of June. And as you look at this, the reds are the ridges and the blues are the troughs. So the cool start to June, there's the trough that gave us that. Here's the heat out west. Now watch, as we go through this week into next week, where does the ridge go? It goes right over the Great Lakes. Such that by the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, it is squarely in place between the Dakotas and probably the Hudson River here. And that ridge is what's bringing in the heat. Now with time, that ridge doesn't really go anywhere. Do you notice how the ensemble forecast from the GFS, this is also echoed in the European, keeps tucking that ridge right back into place over here. Now throughout the remainder of this year, the critical thing to forecast will be this. Will the midsummer ridge favor this position, right on the 100th meridian? Will it be farther to the west, maybe over by the 110th? Or will it be closer to Illinois, around the 95th? We don't want the ridge axis to be here or here. The farther to the west we can make this, the better our chances are of flow coming over the ridge and giving us a lot of summer thunderstorm activity. So let's talk about how that's going to set up. Because let me show you what's going to happen into next week as this pattern evolves. This is the European model forecast for precipitation anomalies out that far. So we see it's going to be wetter than normal down south. But there's been a pretty well forecast drier stretch right in through here that we've now been watching evolve for the last few weeks for the middle of June. Now, could there still be storms during this time? Yes, but not the widespread wet conditions I think that we would want to see just to keep those soil moisture values up. Now, as we look out here fully into the middle of June, going beyond that, let's just swap over and show you what are called the European weeklies. So this comes out twice a week on Tuesday and on Friday. And what I want to show you is what the forecast is. Let's just zoom this out here. Let's go from, there we go. How about June 13th through July the 13th? Now, this is some interesting behavior in the models. You can see that if you get to the east of that line, it appears that there's going to be quite a bit of thunderstorm activity, especially down south. But over the state of Illinois, we see the green shading there, right? The drier conditions are farther to the west. Now, when I look at this, I have to call all of this into question. That's my job. And I want to know why it is forecast to do that. So, first thing is, I went up and looked at the upper level flow. I said, well, over that time period, what's the jet stream level wind doing? And it shows me this, with the ridge back here farther to the west. Now, when I looked at that, in fact, let me just zoom out a little bit. Look at this for the whole of the northern hemisphere. I, just from training and teaching for so many years, know that what the model has just done is it's gone straight into the climatological average. And therefore, there's not much predictive skill in this. Why is it so wet over by us? Well, that answer can be seen if I just step you down in the atmosphere, back down toward the surface, and look at the pressure anomalies. There's the big Bermuda High way over here, and the flow around it is coming like this, pumping in that moisture. Now, if that fails to materialize, all that all that precipitation you saw here won't be there. And I've got some concern about that. My concern comes from this. Our latest ocean temperatures, let's blow this up so we can see a little bit better, show us that we are still very cold compared to normal off the west coast. Now, if you've heard me speak before, I have told you all many times that in spring and summer, cool water here is statistically well correlated with the risk of regional drought development in the Midwest. There's other parts to this as well. The warmth here is also key to that. The cool water off of Africa and the warm water north of Australia, that's part of something we call the Indian Ocean Dipole. It is in its negative phase right now. That is also indicative of drier conditions here, even farther to the east. And while it's warm here where hurricanes are going to develop, this cooler stretch in the mid-Atlantic is a part of something called the negative phase of the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation. Now, I know we're getting a little nerdy here at the end of my video, but what I'm trying to say is the models aren't giving us a really strong signal. And I'm noticing these particular things increasing our potential July, August, into September drought risk. Now, the big question is, will it hit our crop when it's pollinating or when it's trying to fill grain or when the soybeans are setting? All these different questions still remain unanswered. And we're going to have to keep a very, very close eye on these things. But the risk, despite seeing the weather forecast show us wetter conditions, isn't there. The longer range model runs, this is now the June, July, and August forecast from the European model. You do start to see that its seasonal forecast is picking up on drier conditions potentially developing here, primarily west of the Mississippi, but possibly encroaching on the eastern Corn Belt as well. And from there, just to add some support to this is from an entirely different forecast model. It's called the NMME, the National Multi-Model Ensemble, and it also shows that same risk in this area. Now, are these models perfect and very skillful and accurate? Well, no, they aren't, but they're consistently predicting the same thing. So when we combine it all together, the risk of drought development this year is above normal. And even though we've had decent moisture here in spring, we all know how quickly things can shut down. And that's what I'm going to keep watching continually and reporting back to you how this pattern evolves as we finish out spring and start summer and get into the very critical time period for our crops grown here in the state of Illinois. So I'll leave you there. I appreciate your attention. Thank you.